Welcome to Speak with Eve. I'm your host, Eurydice, and today's guest is Ru Freeman. Welcome to the show, Ru.
It's great to be back here.
Everybody, Ru Freeman is a Sri Lankan writer and activist. You've heard her. She's come on our show twice already, so you probably recognize her. She's the author of A Disobedient Girl on Salman Lane and a number of books where she's been editor. She's here mostly in her role as an activist. And Ru, I wanted to talk to you about this election we've just gone through. What do you make of it? What do you think it says about our moment in time?
Well, it's interesting because I was just speaking to a group of university students when I was introduced and when I was invited to speak. One of the concerns that was expressed by the faculty was that students were feeling depressed after the elections. I was able to share with them a perspective that I feel, which is that I actually feel optimistic in this moment because I feel like this is an opportunity for the country to go in a different direction because there is now going to be more of a majority of people who are concerned about the direction of the country and its standing in the world. Whereas previously, I think without this kind of moment of reckoning, there were a lot of people who were quite comfortable just showing up every 4 years and voting for the Democratic Party if that was their thing. And feeling like, okay, well, phew, like we've just escaped dodged a bullet. Everything could be worse, but this is so much better than it could be. I think that this predicament that we're in was brought about because of that way of looking at things. Right now, there is this opportunity for young people in particular to step up and really transform the electoral sphere through their own activism and their own agitation for a third party, or at least 4 or 5 parties if you were in any other country, but at least in this country, one more. So that's kind of like the feeling that I have about this moment. How about you?
Don't know that I'm optimistic, but I do agree that it was necessary, the way that an amputation sometimes is necessary. The Democratic Party had become unrecognizable. I don't know what it's going to be now. It kind of latched on to identity politics and thought that it could use that to completely ignore economic populism, economic needs. And that's not even talking about America in the world, the American empire constantly warmongering. If you add the fact that the Democrats have also become the party of war, it had become unsustainable for many of us to stay in the Democrat tent, and then there was nowhere to go. Every step of the way since 2015, I had hoped that the same thing that happened in the Republican side with MAGA might happen on the Democrat side, at first with Bernie, and then with someone who would take over from Bernie, but instead they kind of came much more retrenched and authoritative, and between the superdelegates and changing the rules for primaries and changing the rules for debates and kind of like unilaterally making decisions, there was no place for a lot of the voters to express themselves. I definitely think that there is a tremendous need for 2 more parties, 2 actual populist parties, and in time those parties would probably supersede and swallow the establishment parties. But first we need Citizens United repealed and a bunch of other changes, because right now it's like the billionaires world and we just live in it and we have to pick our own billionaire to represent us. I don't know if you have that feeling, but it's like we're in Troy and we're the Greeks and the Trojans fighting, and the billionaires are like the Greek gods, and they pick sides and they make things happen for their own entertainment.
I think, of course, Citizens United, we always go back to that. One of the things I've always noticed that every 4 years, people up to the presidential elections, every single time, people start shouting about campaign finance reform and the electoral college and this and that, but nothing actually is done. One of the things I think that is important to consider when we are analyzing these things, if you're doing so intelligently and not just knee-jerk saying, oh, you sat out the election, you wanted Trump to win, or green problem, or the Arab Americans are the problem, or you're a single issue all this BS that is being flung around by the Democrats right now. If you're actually analyzing things as a citizen, I think it is important to consider that if actually the Democrats are so different from the Republicans, there would be some kind of correction every time there is a Democratic
loss.
There should be a correction. Things should be bad but static, but that is not the case. Incarcerations in the United States escalated and have continued to escalate over the last many decades. Poverty has risen over the last many decades. Obama deported in his time. I'm saying that Trump is going to run after illegal immigrants, but under Trump, he did deport a lot of immigrants, 2 million deportations. But during Obama's first term, he deported 3.2 million people, and in his second term, 2.1 million more people. That's Obama. The war that happened in Afghanistan and Iraq, these wars were intensified by Obama. So this idea that somehow the Democratic establishment is better it's a mythology. It is not true. These are two parties equally controlled by the same military industrial complex, by the cryptocurrency markets, by the billionaires and the health pharmaceutical companies. These big corporations run both parties. So if the citizens want something different, then we have to be willing to recognize that, instead of just hiding our heads in the sand and saying, oh no, Trump is here.
Yeah.
Trump is, I know that's a depressing idea, but it's true.
Yeah, and also, what are the Democrats going to do? I mean, I thought they were going to win, but I kept asking, what are the Democrats going to do when they no longer have Trump? It reminded me of that poem by Cavafy, the barbarians were at least the solution.
Yeah. Right.
He's getting old, and who's going to be the next demon, the worst of the two evils? This is no way to sustain party allegiance long term, to just say the other guy is worse. I do think that if we could stay a democracy, I do think that we're there to be a third party that is a populist party that agrees with the progressives and whatever. There is a section of MAGA that seems to be aligned with a lot of the progressive ideals. I think that party would get a lot of the people who never vote to vote for it. Numerically, I'm sure it's a majority, but financially, that's not the case. So that's where we suffer.
Yeah. I mean, I'm curious that you actually thought the Democrats that Kamala Harris was going to win.
Everybody around me on that side was confident that he was going to win.
I would like to say I knew, but I had a very strong feeling she was going to lose. This was the usual Democratic playbook of, oh, we are better than them, A. B, she's a brown/black woman. She's female. And that everybody is going to forget the last, over 12 months of genocide, and everybody was going to forget the arrest and brutalization of students. Everybody was going to forget that there had been no progress after BLM, that everybody was going to forget all this and somehow show up and vote for the blue party. That's so myopic, because people suffer because of this across the board. I mean, when you think about student protests, they were across the country. These are kids from different demographics, different social classes, and there were punitive measures taken against them, very harsh measures taken against them across the country. Those are students who have parents and grandparents and families who are looking at what's happening. And I can't imagine why the Democratic Party would have thought that everybody's going to forget that.
Yeah.
Because Kamala Harris came on the board like the poster child of God knows what, because I could not stand to hear her. She was so dismissive of people, so dismissive of their appeals to reason and morality.
I didn't like her at all. She didn't move me in any way. What I liked least about her was that she would just not speak up her mind. She would not take a stand. She would, she didn't have the moral courage or the character, the strength of character to just say what she thought about anything. It was just unbearable to watch. Constant equivocating. And then, of course, when she decides to embrace Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney and John Bolton, That was the
I know.
ultimate kiss of death. It's like,
Yeah,
lady, if you really
yeah,
think that you're gonna win by getting never Trumpers instead
yeah.
of the rest of your coalition, good luck to you.
And also this idea that she could just like get on Reels and TikTok, and she could say one thing in Michigan and another thing in Pennsylvania, and these two states are not going to talk to each other. What kind
Yeah.
of idiot? Everything goes viral. You just sound like what you are. You are an equivocating, immoral person. If we get up and vote for an equivocating, immoral person, that's who we are too. So
Yeah.
in some way, I feel like, thank God there were lots of people who did not vote for that.
And the idea was that we vote by gender.
Yeah, exactly. This
Like,
is the worst.
we're going to match our gender. So all women vote for the woman and all men vote for the man kind of thing. But more women
Yeah.
vote. So therefore the Democrats will win. I mean, it was asinine. All people
Oh,
of color will vote for anybody who's a person of color. And
exactly.
it's so
And
adolescent, the way that they think. It's the contempt that they have for the masses, for the people, the contempt of the few for the many. That's really
yeah.
unbearable.
Yeah, I've been having these different conversations after the elections with people, and what has struck me, and I say this as someone who has in the past advocated, written about, walked the streets, knocked on doors, and voted for the Democrat.
Yeah,
Right?
same, me too.
I say this as that person. So it's not like I suddenly woke up and decided to be crazy. It comes not just from showing up and voting every election day, but actually being someone who's been participating in the political processes the whole time I've been in the United States. Even before I could vote, I was doing that. So it comes from a place of actual engagement. The Democrats who are blaming everybody else right now are not taking into consideration. And again, that is very condescending. But having conversations across the board with people, what I have noticed is that many people who voted for Trump or didn't vote or whatever have a real clear understanding of some of the issues that have been, gripping the nation. Whereas when I talk to my people in my circle who are Democrats, diehard Democrats who are sort of hanging their heads saying, "Oh my God, Trump," it's a real elitist narrative.
Yes.
People saying things like, well, IVF or gender neutral bathrooms or this and that, things that I think are important, but they can only be as important as fundamental life and death issues that many, many people in this country face, like food security, health care access, education, shelter, safety. These are all equally valid considerations, and the Democrats in my circles never mention those things. They mention these other very, things that are very important, but are only accessible to a very select few people in the country. How many people in this country can afford IVF, for instance? So if you're going to bring IVF as your big platform, who are you really talking to? You're not talking to the breadth of this country. You're talking to a very small minority of people, but also saying that you represent the rest of the people, and then looking down on the rest of the people for voting for somebody else. I mean, it's politically insane.
Yeah, and to me, this was a protest vote, 100%. It wasn't that suddenly the majority of the country woke up and decided that, no, after all, Trump is, a stable genius.
Right.
It was just we don't like what you've done, we feel unheard, unseen, and we'll just go with the other side because you know what? He has been paraded in front of the courts just like we have. He has been defamed, whatever it is. That
Laughing stock.
Right, between the assassination attempts, especially the one on live TV, and all the legal cases before that were going on and on and on, it was easy for a lot more people to see him as the persecuted. And America likes the underdog. He lost, that image he had of the billionaire, entitled, crass, sexist pig, because they went after him excessively, in many cases, in my opinion, inappropriately through the legal system. And that was the first time that a percentage of the electorate turned around and looked at him and identified with him. Like, you want to take him off the ballot. It doesn't matter if people don't plan to vote for him. They understand that goes too far. So I think that's where it began. But even like the IVF, that you just mentioned. He never said he was against IVF. The rich love IVF. They're not going to touch any of that stuff because that's what they like. Especially the pro-lifers. They want everything. Everybody having children in all kinds of manners. Kind of like demeaning that they think that we're going to vote on one thing, like IVF or abortion, when the Supreme Court said chemical abortion is legal. 90% or something of abortions now are through the abortion pill.
I think that persecuting Trump for treason and the attack on the Capitol and all of those things were valid if they had actually been done correctly and seen to their natural end. They were not, because the Democrats were ineffectual in that regard, because they would have had, if legal procedure, done.
Yeah, they should have done it right away, not after he announced he's running again.
Yeah, it's true that, I mean, if you and I, as human beings, you know, even if you think about it as like cliques, like remember, like you're in high school or you're in college and there's a clique of people and they're all the inner circle and they treat you like you're like this backward person who isn't wearing the latest, I don't know what the latest thing is, Prada, I don't know. We are not wearing that, so therefore you must be like, you know, not very classy and you are left out. Well, what in God's name would make you want to join that clique? No, you're going to find a different clique. And this is such a fundamental problem with the Democratic Party, which is like this disregard and way they talk about everybody else, like, oh, these stupid people, or this. I was on the plane coming back from Europe, actually, and there were these two people who were sitting next to me, and I was, you know, sort of briefly chatted, and they were coming back to the US after the elections, and they were like, oh my God, we have to go back, and then they started talking about how terrible it is and people are stupid and all of this usual stuff, right? And then also they said this thing about, oh, they're so scared for what's going to happen to Ukraine. They went on about that. And at some point, the guy who was sitting next to me, he's from North Carolina, she was from California, he turned to me and said, oh, you know, I don't want to, what are you doing? And I said, I'm actually writing an article about the election, so I'm interested in your conversation. And he said, oh, you know, I don't want to offend you in case you voted for Trump. No, I mean, do I even, whatever. Okay. Said, no, I did not. But I said, consider the conversation you just had. The two of you sat down and you expressed great concern for what's going to happen to Ukraine. But look at the cap I'm wearing. It has Palestine on it. What do you, like, you didn't even mention that place. And you're both white people who are concerned about Ukraine and think everybody else is stupid because they voted for Trump. I work all day on Palestine. I'm deeply connected to the socialist movement here in the US. To the fact that just because I didn't vote for Trump means that somehow I'm aligned with you it's incorrect. It's an incorrect assumption. I find this kind of conversation among many Democrats as condescending. Like the way you dismiss huge swaths of the population in the United States and feel no kinship with the rest of these people, as if somehow you're this pure person when you personally are blind to the fact that your government has been perpetrating genocide over a year, and that doesn't even cross your mind. If you look at the vote that just happened, this is still a democratic president. There was no change in that vote. There has been no change even after having lost an election. This should tell people whom they're actually answerable to. It is not to you and me who go, you know, pony up to the ballot box. They're answering to somebody else entirely.
It's really all about money, unfortunately, and you can't simplify it. It's complicated. We can't simplify it too much. It's hard to say one issue is greater or more important than the other. But having admitted that, I do think that the economic issue overwhelms, unfortunately, all of the identity-based issues that we're fighting for. So as women, we're fighting for reproductive rights. We support trans rights. But in the greater picture, what's happening in terms of who controls the money supply and the way that money is distributed is much more important, because in the end that's what determines all of these other issues. It's decided by those who control the economy, and that's the world we live in. More and more we're pushed away further and further from nature, the agrarian way of life, the old world way of life. So we're more and more dependent in the system that is money based, and our choice seems to be increasingly symbolic. That's what we're talking about. We're saying, well,
right, exactly.
Right.
And 820 billion was spent on arms in 2023. I don't even have the figure for 2024. I mean, I could probably find it, but that is many times, that's much less than what was spent in 2024. Much of it went for dropping bombs on children. So when you talk about, finances, what is actually being invested in people and actual life versus what is being invested in military and ending life, there's a big space there for people, if they actually want to get to the bottom of things, can occupy and think about. I mean, that's why I feel optimistic now. Somebody wrote to me, someone you and I both know, but in the literary world, saying something like, this taking me to task, this is before the elections, not supporting Kamala Harris, and saying this, if Trump comes, the demonic powers of Trump will be in all our living rooms. And what I want to say is, no, they have not been in your living rooms in the past. They may well be in your living rooms now. And maybe that is finally going to light a fire under your ass. Because up till now, it hasn't, because you've been happy to vote for the Democratic Party and pretend that everything is fine, when it isn't. People are poor, mostly black, but also white. People are still incarcerated in massive amounts of, numbers. There's a police brutality and the outrageous funding of the police, the complete dismantling of education, and the lack of healthcare for people has been ongoing.
Oh yeah, it gets worse and worse, and the income disparity is just mind-boggling. I feel that every few months that in itself becomes bigger, and more than anything else, that income disparity in today's world means that we're not equal. We can't be equal. When one person is worth like 300 billion and most other people are worth 30,000, if they're lucky, there is just no way that these two are equal under the law or by any measure. How can we pretend to be a democracy if it doesn't mean that we're worth the same amount of money, but somehow we have the same say in our joint society? We are supposed to join it willingly and have the same rights and the same obligations and the same laws, and that just doesn't work when there is such an extraordinary difference between our economic capacities, and then you have generational wealth, right? So you were a country of immigrants, but we still have the power of generational wealth. So when you have so many people coming, new immigrants like you and I, or all the people who have been coming more recently, immigrants come with nothing. You're supposed to be equal to people who inherit from the boomers. So the system needs to be reconsidered. We need to rethink the way that money is distributed.
Yeah. And also to that point, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but Matthew Desmond's, who wrote Evicted, his new book, which is Poverty by America, that's the title, which I think is a great title, is actually talking about the innumerable ways in which there are tax breaks given to the wealthy, and it is never considered, a handout, whereas everything that is given to poor people is considered, unearned handout, like food stamps or subsidies for housing or health, Medicaid. Any of these things are considered handouts. But if you think about it, he points out, like, for instance, property, you can take these deductions if you own a home on your mortgage. You can put away money tax-free into 529k for your kids. These are all tax breaks, and when you add them up, they are far higher than any of the money spent on social programs, welfare programs for the poor. But we never talk about those in the same terms, because it's perfectly fine to do these things for rich people. It is not fine to do any of it for poor people who actually need it. And there is no regulation on the processes that are in place, like predatory landlords and predatory banking systems, like check cashing places for people who don't have bank accounts. All of these things they're designed to keep the poor getting poorer by the day and really seeing no way out. So if they feel like they're going to vote for someone who is going to blow everything up, can you blame them?
I cannot blame them. And I do agree, the corporate welfare is rampant. We pay taxes, and the taxes are used to give breaks to corporations. We pay taxes. The money that goes to defense has never been audited in decades. They can't figure out where all of these hundreds of billions go.
Yep.
And there is no accountability. They're like, oh, oops, okay, then we'll raise your budget anyway. The system of what you said, the tax breaks is growing. There are like tens of thousands now of pages with these different breaks and exceptions. If you have an army of accountants, you can get away with anything. And we all know that. The millionaires, and especially the billionaires, they just have like family foundations, and they pay all the members of the family huge salaries, and then the money goes there to appearing to be non-profit. The whole non-profit thing as tax breaks is a scam. Everybody knows that. By now, people know that because there have been conversations in in the public discourse about billionaires like Bill Gates donating money for people to take vaccines from the pharmaceutical company in which he's the main shareholder, kind of thing. I think that our population is intelligent and is interested and is engaged. I think that a lot of people understand that the system is wrong. They just want someone to go in there and change it. And the only one who was saying that we're going to change it was Trump. So they were like, well, we have nobody else. I guess we're stuck with this billionaire. I mean, I really think that they just want the system to be changed. They know it's corrupt. He calls it rigged. And I think that's why it was a protest vote. That's what people want. I think the majority. They don't want our current like economic model, which started in World War II, really, after World War II, is to just keep adding dependents and consumers. They're doing it. They did it here. They're doing it they did it in Europe with the EU. I think maybe the BRICS is going to do it next. They're trying to consolidate themselves under a single currency, and then they all have to buy, I guess, China's products. So we are enslaved consumers. They'll pay the population. They want the population, and they'll somehow keep us financially afloat enough so we can buy the goods of the biggest corporations, and that's it.
Yeah. I mean, I've often thought of the United States as actually a marketplace, and it is every marketplace goes. The people who have money prosper, and those who don't have to be convinced that there is something worth buying. We run around like crazy people trying to purchase this and purchase that we are told is very necessary for our very existence, including our 401ks and investment portfolios, which really serve nobody except the billionaires. And then we act surprised when things fall apart. But it is. This is how everything is run here. It serves a very small minority of people, and the rest of the people, like you just said, are consumers and dependents. Yeah.
And then we have this deficit, right?
Yeah.
And everybody's pretending that that's just imaginary. It's an imaginary debt, and it's real. I mean, that's part of that indebted nature of our existence, that we are always going to be debtors in one way or another. We're going to owe. Yeah.
Do you feel, we talked at the beginning about ways forward and who's going to come to the forefront, and I said I'm optimistic and you said you weren't. But
yes.
Thinking, I mean, Jill Stein got quite a number of votes throughout the country. She did not make the difference in why Kamala Harris lost, though people would like to say that without actually looking at the numbers. And also when you said, you pointed out that the Democrats went after Trump, and we may disagree about the ways that it happened. But I don't think we do. I think we're pretty close on much of this. But that they went after Trump. The Democratic Party went after Jill Stein in every state. So it's like going after your opponent instead of actually presenting yourself as a viable option, which has always been the Democratic thing. But still, I feel optimistic about the possibility that people might actually come to their senses and do something different. I mean, what do you see as a potential? Do you have anybody in particular in mind that you think would galvanize an opposition decision?
I'm very open to finding someone charismatic enough and determined enough and passionate enough. People are cowed by a lot of this, and for good reason. The playbook, I think that one of the reasons that Trump appeared briefly, he appeared as a victim, is that it was the same thing that they did to Jill Stein, the same thing that they did to Howard Dean.
And Bernie.
Yeah, Bernie, Bobby Kennedy. There is so much talent in that side of the aisle, and they have destroyed them really for no reason. They called Jill Stein a Russian asset too in 2016. I mean, it was insane. Bernie would have won. If they had let Bernie win the nomination, he would have won, defeated Trump that election. He would have won it. If they had let Bobby Kennedy run this time, he might have got the nomination. If it was just him, I don't know who else would have run. But
there's AOC.
Over Kamala, he would have won. I don't know why more people didn't run. I don't know what was happening behind the scenes. Even the way that Biden was kind of like selected after the South Carolina primary in the previous election was suspicious to me. The way that Bernie very quickly went along with it. I know he had a heart attack. At the time, I thought, well, he almost died, COVID. It's very hard to understand what has been going on behind the scenes. I don't see the talent that would make me excited to work for them, for him or for her or for them.
I mean, there is AOC and Rashida Tlaib. I'm going to hear her speak today. There are some people, going back again to an earlier point you made, there is a coalition that needs to come together that includes the Green Party, the Socialist Party, a lot of the young people who are trying to find different, form different alliances. I think if they all came together as under one umbrella, that is a fighting chance. And they had someone who is charismatic to take over, representing.
I would like an independent, whoever that might be, rather than from the ranks of. I mean, AOC to me is tainted. I'm no longer interested in what she says. She was such a warmonger and a disappointment on that front. Someone who hasn't been so deep in the Democrat Party in fighting would be great. There is space for a new women's movement. Conversation can be had about how do we as women move forward in a way that makes us feel empowered again. I haven't really heard much. I have heard people say, okay, we're gonna stockpile in hormone therapy or abortion pills, but I haven't really picked up the energy of a new movement, which is what we need now. Hopefully it will happen, because when you're in the opposition, you always get stronger. You get more support. So there will be more and more people again joining this coalition in opposition to the incoming administration. If we can take advantage of that as it happens and get the right leader in front of a movement again, I think then I would be optimistic.
I mean, optimism takes work, right? You have to actually work to. I know I'm this piece that I'm writing. I'm just so buried in work that I haven't finished it, but it's get those thoughts out there, and I think it is incumbent upon anybody who is actually invested in the future of this country, which is so intricately connected to other countries, to make these opinions heard, to have those kinds of conversations, and to have conversations across your comfort zones. This is the way you start to get people to think about things differently. And I mean, like this podcast for me is another opportunity to do that, and for you as well. And you do that because you have these conversations regularly with people, get these voices put into the universe, other people's thoughts as well. So I think it's important that everybody does that and doesn't just sit around. And I was in Maine and I heard lots of people say, oh, we are in this treasured little corner where we can escape like the worst of the Trump. And I was like, wow, but you are part of the country. I mean, you don't care about, are you just going to, what are you going to do? Like a response to anything, good or bad, is you wade in as best you can and you say things and you do things and you become uncomfortable.
And we listen. That would help.
Yeah.
We speak and we also listen.
Of course, yes. I mean, in this case, we get to talk, but we're listening to one another,
Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show today. And everyone out there, thank you for listening. And until next week, keep speaking up.